Hello, I'm going to explain why there is a zodiac. Have you ever asked yourself the question, why is there a zodiac? If you believe in astrology that there's Aries, Taurus, Gemini, where does it come from? Some astrologers no longer ask the question. It's like when a child asks, why is the sky blue? And you think, well, I don't know, it's blue. I don't really ask that question anymore. Maybe at one time you did. So it's an interesting question. Why is there a zodiac? Why are there these 30 degrees in the sky that's related to Aries? Well, we know it's not based on the stars. The tropical zodiac Aries is not any particular group of stars. There is a constellation called Aries and a constellation called Taurus, but the constellation Aries is not the tropical sign Aries. So it's not based on the stars. Some people say it's based on the seasons because Aries begins with the vernal equinox and the sun is at the vernal equinox when spring begins. So there is a little connection, a basic connection between seasons and the zodiac signs, but that's it. When you look at this more closely, the connection between the seasons and the signs is very, very weak. It's not a very good connection at all. I have an entire video that's about a half hour long that explains why this idea that the zodiac signs are based on the seasons is not very good. In fact, it's done some, you might say, some damage. I'll read the second sentence here in the second paragraph. The belief that the zodiac sign is closely related to seasons has distorted our understanding of the zodiac signs. We've done controlled research studies, not just anecdotal evidence, that suggests that the meaning of the zodiac signs is a bit different from the usual meanings. So we've done a lot of things, and at the end of this tutorial video, I will give links to some of the other videos where we explain these things. And the research we've done on zodiac signs, which shows that Aries is not as fiery and pioneering based on this idea that it's the beginning of spring and it's ruled by Mars. Aries does something that's similar to that, but actually a little bit different. And we have ways of figuring this out. So we're creating some real big revolutions in astrology by having a way of doing controlled research to figure out things. And we've also figured out why things exist and how they work. Okay, so the tropical zodiac is not based on the stars, not really based on the seasons, as I explained in this other video, which I'll provide a link to at the end of this video. So do we have any idea where the zodiac comes from? Assuming there is a zodiac, if you believe in that part of astrology, it's a curious question. Where does it come from? Well, the answer comes from a surprising place. The tropical zodiac is created by Fibonacci numbers. Now, when you first hear this, it sounds crazy, like, how did the Fibonacci numbers get out in the sky? I mean, it sounds like a weird, crazy abstraction. There are these things called Fibonacci numbers, a sequence of numbers, and somehow these numbers are in the sky. Well, yeah, they are. And it's not as abstract and crazy as it sounds. And more specifically, what it is that there are beats or rhythms that you can make in Fibonacci numbers, and it's these rhythms or beats in the Fibonacci numbers that create the zodiac. Sounds wild, but stay with me and I'll explain this I'm going to do this in 3 sections. Number 1, I'll explain what a Fibonacci sequence is and how we get beats in the Fibonacci sequence. It's very simple. I'll explain that in 1 slide, probably 5 or 10 minutes I can explain that. Number 2, I'll give some examples of these patterns that relate to the zodiac signs. Number 3, I will explain how the numbers got into the sky, so to speak. That the idea that the Fibonacci numbers are creating a zodiac sounds bizarre at first, but actually there are a lot of ideas in physics that suggest that this is true. And that this is a natural development from the current theoretical ideas in physics. So our current ideas in physics do not yet suggest that the Fibonacci numbers get distributed around a circle. But what I'm suggesting is that Fibonacci numbers get distributed around a circle, and that circle includes the sky. I'll explain how this fits within the theoretical frameworks of physics. So they are not ideas in physics yet, but they fit within the ideas of physics. So that's the three things I'm going to do. So first of all, what are these Fibonacci numbers? You probably know this already. Fibonacci numbers are 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. You just take two numbers and add them to get the next one. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, 5 plus 8 is 13, 8 plus 13 is 21, etc. And you can go on forever. Now, those are the Fibonacci numbers. What we do to create the zodiac is we do what mathematicians call a modulus function on the Fibonacci numbers, and it's like a beat, a rhythm within the Fibonacci numbers. So for example, take a number. You can take any number. Let's take the number 8. If we divide 8 into 13, we get 1 with a remainder of 5. So the remainder is the number we use. So we still get 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. When we get to 8, 8 becomes 0, because 8 divided into 8 is 1 with a remainder of 0. 13 becomes 5. 21 also becomes 5, because 8 divided into 21 is 2 with a remainder of 5. So this is just dividing 8 into that number, and you get this sequence. So it's a kind of a beat or rhythm. It's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. You divide by 8 and see how many are left over. And an interesting thing happens. After you do 12 of the Fibonacci numbers, you'll get back to a 1, and you'll get a 7 1, and 7 plus 1 will give you the 0, and it will repeat over and over again. So you get a pattern of 12 numbers that will repeat over and over again. If you want to take the time, you can Google Fibonacci numbers, find this sequence, or just add them yourself, 34 plus 55, divide by 8, and take the remainder, and you will see that you will get this sequence of 12 numbers that will repeat forever. So you get the 12 numbers. And what I'm suggesting is that these 12 numbers are creating the 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, again, I realize this sounds like maybe a fishing expedition where, okay, there's a rhythm of 12 numbers in Fibonacci numbers, there are 12 signs in the zodiac, so this guy is going to tell me that they are intimately connected. It sounds like you're just taking two unrelated things and connecting them. Yes, they're not as unrelated as it seems. These 12 numbers are creating the 12 zodiac signs, as I will explain in this lecture. Now, these modulus functions of Fibonacci numbers have been known about since the 1700s, and they're called the Pisano Periods. So Pisano Periods create the zodiac is the quick and easy way to explain what I'm suggesting. Pisano Periods create the zodiac. Okay, so I told you I was going to do this in 3 sections. Here's my 3 sections. I'll explain what the Fibonacci sequence is and how beats in the sequence are obtained. They're obtained by doing a modulus function, and these are called Pisano periods. Step 1 is done. Step 2, I'll now show you some examples of this. I started showing you an example already where we're starting to see that this sequence of 12 numbers that's created by the modulus 8 function creates a repeating sequence of 12 and relates to the idea that there are 12 zodiac signs. So I'll give some more examples and a little more detail of how that works. Let me say one thing about this before I get into part 2 of this presentation. The connections between Pisano periods and zodiac signs and other ideas in astrology is completely and absolutely mind-boggling. This is not just, oh, we got 12 numbers and there are 12 signs. It's incredible. We will see rulers of the signs. We will see the elements. We'll see things repeated, elements, fire, earth, air, water. We'll see things repeated over and over again. It's phenomenal. And then the third thing is I will describe that this is not such a bizarre idea and how it fits into ideas in physics and mathematics. It's really a kind of a natural development from current ideas in physics. It's not an idea in physics now. It's not an idea that Fibonacci numbers get distributed around a circle, and specifically Pisano periods get distributed around a circle, but it fits within the framework of thinking in physics. So what I'm doing is I'm suggesting how the zodiac signs are created, and I'm building a model which integrates astrology with physics, and coming up with a model that explains both, and that they're all part of one and the same thing. Okay. All right. Let me show you some examples of this. Here is the Pisano period based on the number 8. We take the Fibonacci numbers, divide by 8, and get the remainder. I told you that there are 12 numbers that repeat forever, and I put 0 with Aries, 1 with Taurus, 1 with Gemini, 2 with Cancer, etc. So we've got 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 becomes 0, 13 becomes 5 because we're doing modulus 8. So it's 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 0, 5, 5, 2, 7, 1. This sequence repeats over and over again. Well, not only are there 12 numbers, but the numbers for the fire signs add up to 8. 0 plus 3 plus 5 is 8. The numbers for the earth signs add up to 8. 1 plus 5 plus 2 is 8. For air signs, they add up to 8. 1 plus 0 plus 7 is 8. And for water signs, 2 plus 5 plus 1 is 8. So we will see this with all of the Fibonacci sequences, all of these Pisano periods. You'll see that when you add numbers, they will total up to become some kind of pattern. And here we see that all of the elements, fire, earth, air, and water, total to 8. And 8 is particularly important because that's our rhythm. That's our beat number. And 8 becomes 0. So when you take all of the air signs together, they equal 0, which is the all, which is the fundamental sound that we're creating. So this is a typical kind of pattern you see. So the Pisano periods in a beat of 8, modulus 8, create 12 numbers, and those 12 numbers get nicely arranged according to the elements. And furthermore, only the earth and water elements, which are called feminine, have the number 2, and 2 traditionally is related to being feminine. So that makes sense. In fact, the earth and the water signs, the feminine elements, have the same exact numbers. Here's the water, which is 2, 1, 5, going in a clockwise direction, and the earth is 2, 1, 5, going in the counterclockwise direction. And this is also common where you'll see patterns and one goes clockwise and the other goes counterclockwise. And the fire and air, the two masculine, have the number 0 and odd numbers. All the odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, and 7, which are the only odd numbers in this modulus 8 function. So you get some nice, interesting, consistent patterns. This is what happens not only with the base 8, but let's look at 9, the base 9 or modulus 9 function. When you do a modulus 9, a Pisano period based on 9, in other words, you'll get 24 numbers. You get 2 numbers for each half of the sign. So I'm starting here at Aries and get 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 4. Remember, when you reach 9, you're going to be back to 0. And these are the 24 numbers that repeat over and over again forever when you do a Pisano period based on modulus 9. And again, you'll get beautiful patterns. The opposite numbers always add to 9, except for the 0, which is the starting point, and it's 0, 0. All the others add to 9, and 9 is 0, because we divide by 9. So, for example, in this sequence, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 4, 3, 7, 1, 8, 0, 8, we're putting that 24 numbers around the circle. 8 ends up opposite to 1. And then 8 opposite to 1, 7, 2. So the opposites add to 9. So you get these beautiful patterns. What you would think would be random, just adding two numbers you think would result in some random result, ends up creating an ordered result with opposites adding to 9. Also, the only 2s and 7s, there's only this 2, 7 and this 2, 7. They're exactly square to each other, making a cross. So you get some other interesting patterns going on. And in fact, if you play with these numbers long enough and you start adding the two numbers that make up each sign, you will see incredible patterns. The longer you look at these numbers and analyze them, the more extraordinary things you find. And what's really mind-blowing is the ideas relate exactly to ideas in astrology. That's what's mind-boggling. So this fellow Russell Olhausen, Russell has gone in and analyzed these base 9 Pisano period. He doesn't call them a Pisano period base 9, he calls them indigs. He's adding the numbers together as you do in numerology, which is a shortcut calculation for Pisano period 9, base 9, modulus 9. So he's actually doing a Pisano period modulus 9 is another way of looking at what he's doing, and he finds that there are what we call in astrology decanates. He's got the traditional ruling planets of the zodiac signs that Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. He's found symmetries that match the ruling planets. It's unbelievable. The number of Anticia, contra Anticia. These numbers, if you're taking the Fibonacci numbers, which is a basic growth sequence that's found in nature. You're probably familiar with nautilus shells and sunflower seeds and all kinds of things. The rate of growth of populations, all related to Fibonacci numbers. A basic growth pattern. We find rhythms in it by doing modulus functions, and then we find that this growth pattern is distributed exactly like ideas in astrology. We see the 12 signs, we see decanates, we see ruling planets. It's incredible. We see Anticia, contra Anticia. So Russell is one of the people who's discovered these patterns in Pisano periods. Here we do base 10. So I've talked about modulus 8, modulus 9. Here we're going to do modulus 10. This was discovered by a fellow, Brian Ray Payne. I have an entire video, about a half hour long, just on this. Just on Pisano period modulus 10, and it is completely mind-boggling. You'll see when you do base 10, you get 60 numbers. But when you put those 60 numbers around the circle, you'll find the zodiac signs are here. You'll find sign gender, what signs are masculine and feminine. All kinds of relationships are found. You'll also see, of course, you're probably noticing these 5-pointed stars are in there. It is absolutely mind-boggling. You have to watch this video to believe it. And at the end of this video, I have links to these other videos. So you can, click on that link and watch the entire video on all of the intricate relationships of astrology and the qualities of the zodiac sign to this Fibonacci sequence, specifically Pisano period based on 10. It's mind-boggling. Another person who's made contributions to this is Raphael Gilbrand. He's also done a lot of work on relationships of the golden ratio to astrology. I've worked a lot in prime numbers, and all of us have worked with Fibonacci numbers as well. So we have a number of researchers all coming up with extraordinary connections between Fibonacci number sequences, prime numbers, and golden ratio to astrology. It's mind-boggling. I'm suggesting that this Fibonacci sequence, this growth sequence, is in the sky, which sounds crazy, but in this last section of this presentation, I'll explain how it gets into the sky, and that these rhythms, these modulus functions of the Fibonacci numbers, also exist, and they all exist simultaneously. And then even the relationship between the different modulus functions creates results, which is a little bit like three notes making a chord. So when you take the modulus 5 Pisano period and you double it to 10, you'll see a relationship between them, which also creates the four elements. So you'll see the four elements, fire, earth, air, and water, not only in the modulus 8 function, which I just showed you, but also you'll see it in the relationship of the 5 function, the 5 modulus, and the 10 modulus. Well, if your head is starting to spin already, that's what happens when you study this. What's happening is there is an intricate, beautiful tapestry, mind-boggling complexity and elegance in these sequence of numbers that creates this 12 pattern plus elements and rulerships and antitia and contra-antitia, and then we've also built in other ideas. Prime numbers, for example, affect astrology as well. So, but one of the main things that creates the zodiac, why is there a tropical zodiac? Because these Pisano periods create them. Now, last section of today's presentation, how did the Pisano periods get into nature? How did they get in the sky to create this pattern in the sky? Let me give you some ideas on how that happens. So last section for today's presentation, Pisano periods, the zodiac, and physics, and how we're moving towards the theory of everything. Okay. I'm going to build upon ideas in mathematics and physics. We're not going to violate any known rules of physics. We're going to add new ideas and build upon what's currently known in physics. Some people are going to regard these ideas as very speculative. However, what we're doing is we're taking ideas in astrology and also controlled studies in astrology. And I'll provide links to videos on that as well. We're not just using anecdotal evidence. We're pushing astrology to a whole new level where we're actually getting evidence from controlled studies on how aspects work and how they predict different vocational choices and personality traits. So we're opening up whole new areas of astrology. The astrological community in general, at the point of making this, is only barely aware of the breakthroughs we're making. But people in academics, in psychology, and a lot of young people are embracing this revolution in astrology where we're figuring out how astrology works through controlled research, and we're developing models for how the astrological ideas work. So we're finding out why there's a zodiac. So we're building both a body of scientific literature in astrology as well as a scientific model to explain these discoveries. So I'm going to introduce some new ideas, but they're help create a coherent and consistent model that does not have any contradictions and fits within the current ideas of astrology. Okay, here's how the Fibonacci numbers get into the sky. First of all, space is curved and raises the question, does space also have structure? So normally, in normal thinking, if we're not doing physics, we think of space as just an area that things occupy. You have a house, a car, a rock, whatever, it exists in space. We don't think of space as a thing. We just think things exist in space. However, in physics, you get statements like space is curved, according to relativity theory. How can space be curved? I mean, the idea doesn't completely make sense to the human mind. But the mathematical formulas used in relativity theory imply that that space is a thing and space is curved. So there are ideas in physics that are difficult for our human minds to grasp, but the mathematics implies that space is a container with its own character in which things exist, and space can be curved. Well, excuse me. If space can be curved, it can be shaped, it can be formed. If it's like a sculpture that can be that's rounded, then maybe there's also structures within space. And in fact, there are some physicists who say that there are structures in space. So space has an inherent structure. Also, in this last paragraph, there's extremely little matter in space. The distance between fundamental particles is enormous, just as the space between planets and minor planets and asteroids, and also if you take all the stars in a group, a galaxy, the space between galaxies is enormous. Most of what exists is space. We think objects are solid, like if I bang my knuckles against a door and I knock on the door is solid because of these forces that are holding the particles together. Makes it feel as if it's hard, but it's mostly space. So what's actually going on is that space exists, space has a shape, that shape is curved, and physicists like Nassim Haramein suggest that there's also inherent structures within space. So the idea that there are structures within space is now a growing idea in physics. And I'm suggesting that one of these structures are the Pisano periods. Now, there's a lot more to this. If you think about the particles, there are three basic properties of fundamental particles. They have mass, which you can think of as like a weight, a charge, positive or negative, and spin. Now, I think this is very curious that the fundamental particles have mass. Okay, I can, intuitively make sense out of that. Charge, okay, intuitively make sense out of that, I guess. But the fact that fundamental particles have something called spin is really interesting. And spin is similar to a spinning top. It has angular momentum, this circular momentum. But the spin of particles is not literally a form of physical spinning. So here again, we're faced with how the mathematical formulas come up with concepts that we can't completely understand with the human mind. If I think of angular momentum, my mind wants to imagine something that must be moving in a circle, like the Earth or other planets revolving around the sun, or the Earth spinning on its axis, some kind of movement that creates the angular momentum. But the physicists are telling us, the quantum physicists are telling us, that there's spin in these particles, but it's not from motion. Well, my brain can't grasp that. The human brain can't quite grasp it, but that's what the mathematics indicates. So to read from Wikipedia, in quantum mechanics and particle physics, spin is an intrinsic form of angular momentum. It's a form of angular momentum carried by elementary particles, composite particles, and atomic nuclei. Spin is one of the two types of angular momentum in quantum physics, the other being orbital angular momentum. The orbital angular momentum operator is the quantum mechanical counterpart to the classic angular momentum of orbital revolution. So you have a quantum level of angular momentum, and then you have a grosser physical level that are closely related. So you get this sense in quantum mechanics of like a fractal nature, where there's this angular momentum operating at the tiny, tiny, tiny level, and then it operates at larger levels, such as planets spinning on their axis and revolving around planets. Physical forms of angular momentum and non-physical forms at the quantum level, the very tiny level. Reality is strange, but has some similarities to our level of existence. Larger, not subatomic level. Okay, so what I'm proposing is that there are growth cycles within spin. That's what I'm proposing. We know that there's spin. There's spin at the subatomic level, and there's a kind of spin at gross level. People like Nassim Haramein are suggesting that there are structures within space, and I'm suggesting that within spin there are structures created out of the Fibonacci sequence. And how the Fibonacci sequence gets into spin, I don't know, but that's usually where physics stops. They're just mathematical models that fit the data. Now, right now, we don't have any data to analyze where we need this other than astrological data. So Of course, scientists aren't interested in astrology. There's no solid quantitative evidence for it yet. That's another thing we're working on. As our research continues and we start getting consistent measurable effects, then we're going to have to come up with theories to explain it. And I'm already providing the theories for why these things exist. So there are structures in space, and I believe some of the structures are created by the inherent property of spin. Now, this might sound ridiculously speculative, especially to physicists who think astrology is nonsense. But, excuse me, if you think there's anything to astrology and these 12 divisions of 30 degrees and the idea of rulers and antition, contraintition, elements, all of this, it fits perfectly explained mathematically by Pisano periods. So by introducing this one idea into physics, that Pisano periods are created through the fundamental property of spin, we now explain why astrology exists, and we marry physics with astrology with no inconsistencies, no illogical conclusions. We're just adding a new idea. So conclusion, sacred geometry. By sacred geometry, I mean this fundamental structure of space, and space is, in a sense, more fundamental than things, created from the fundamental forces of spin, creates the zodiac, as well as other astrological influences. So that's the idea. Okay, so to review here, we've got 4 steps to what I'm proposing. Number 1, there's a Fibonacci sequence of growth. That's already known. That's true. Things like nautilus shells and pine cones and other things show evidence that they're growing according to a Fibonacci sequence. We can take beats of the Fibonacci sequence to get harmonic growth patterns. Well, that's an interesting proposal, not too wild and crazy. That's pretty reasonable. And number 3, that these harmonic growth patterns, in other words, the Pisano periods, get distributed where there's spin from the fundamental particle level to the level of rotating bodies and orbiting bodies. That is the pioneering idea that we're introducing to integrate astrology with physics as one consistent fact of life. For scientists who don't believe in astrology, they don't need to make this connection. But I believe in astrology, so I'm making this connection. And number 4, we even have more detail in our understanding of why 0 Aries is where it is. And it has to do with a form of compactification, which is a dimension reduction, and I'll talk about that. That the sphere undergoes a dimension reduction to great circles, and the great circles intersect to create these powerful points of tropical 0 Aries in the Ascendant. So we're understanding from ideas in physics, including ideas in string theory, how the zodiac is created, and we understand this. Let's say our theory for it is very detailed. So again, the 4 points to this theory of where the zodiac comes from. We're assuming the Fibonacci series is a growth sequence. That's already established. We know that. That's pretty much a fact in science. Number 2, we can take Pisano periods of the Fibonacci sequence to get meaningful growth sequences. At this particular website at toronto.edu, the professor gives a table of Pisano periods up to modulus 12. And here are the number of periods. As I told you, if you do modulus 8, you get 12. If you do modulus 9, you get 24 numbers in a sequence. If you do modulus 10, you get 60. If you do modulus 11, you get 10. You always get these similar numbers, which will create patterns within the functions that they create. Within the sequence of numbers that they create, you'll get beautiful patterns as well. So I think that these beats are creating the zodiac. 3, I'm suggesting that Pisano periods are distributed wherever there is spin. As far as I know, the only evidence of this so far are the rules of astrology. The reason I'm introducing this idea is I'm going to guess that astrology works, and if it works, it must have a reason why it works. And by introducing the idea that there's a structure in space created by Pisano periods, wherever there is spin, and there's spin everywhere, this creates the zodiac. So I'm building a model to explain how astrology can exist within the context of known physics. Now, there's another possibility. Perhaps the ancient people who developed their theories of astrology had an advanced knowledge of mathematics and developed the astrology out of their advanced knowledge of mathematics. So I think that that's unlikely, that they understood the mathematics to that much detail. But if they did, maybe astrology is just a mathematical model. In any case, what I think is extremely unlikely is that the close connection of astrological ideas with Pisano periods, prime numbers, and the golden ratio is just a coincidence. That is essentially impossible. It's not. If you watch the other videos and you start to grasp the number of connections, the ways that these number sequences imply all of the basic rules of astrology, it's too much of a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence. Either the early astrologers developed their theories based on mathematics, or they based it loosely on mathematics, and it started to line up more exactly because there is this mathematical basis behind astrology. Now, why is it that tropical zero Aries, why is it that the vernal equinox is the beginning of the tropical zodiac? This we understand through dimension reduction. Dimension reduction means you take something that's many dimensions, such as a ball. Suppose you have a basketball. It's round, it's three-dimensional. It has height, width, and depth. If you look at the basketball from a great distance and you can no longer see the shadows for the ball, it'll just look like a flat surface. It'll become two-dimensional. And at an extreme distance, it'll look like a dot, which you could think of as one dimension. So our eyes, our vision, does dimension reduction. As we move something farther away, it goes from 3 to 2 to 1 dimension. And there's an idea in string theory that there are, for example, 11 dimensions of reality, but they fold in on each other. They're so small, or we can't get access to them, that they kind of fold in on each other. So you get this idea of what's called compactification, or dimension reduction. And what happens in astrology is exactly that. There's a three-dimensional celestial sphere, and when you reduce the sphere to 2 dimensions, you get a great circle. And interesting, in astronomical calculations, we measure things in great circles, where an object is in relationship to a great circle. And there are several obvious great circles to use. One is the apparent path of the sun. Another one is the celestial horizon. Another one's the celestial equator. So you have these great circles that are used for measurement purposes. And it may be that these great circles actually have a condensed geometry of space. Not only are they used as a convenience for measurement, but they are a dimension reduction of the spherical reality. And then where two great circles intersect, in essence has the power of the whole sky. And in astrology, where two great circles intersect, creates zero Aries. That's the intersection of the great circles called the ecliptic plane and the celestial equator, and the ascendant, which is the intersection of the horizon plane with the ecliptic plane. So these points of enormous power that are the starting points of the zodiac, the starting point of the houses in an astrology chart, make complete sense and fit very nicely within the theoretical framework of physics, and specifically within the context of this idea of dimension reduction, which is used in string theory and some other theories in physics. So what I'm suggesting, to summarize, is that the ideas of astrology can be understood very clearly, with no contradictions and inconsistencies, as an expression of the fundamental structures of space and the fundamental structures of reality. We have to introduce some new ideas, but no ideas that contradict the fundamental ideas of astrology. So I've already gone through this. The 4 assumptions that we have: that there's a Fibonacci sequence of growth. This is known to be true. That there are beats within the Fibonacci sequence. In other words, the modulus functions that create rhythms of growth. This is certainly possible. And notice also that even prime numbers have harmonic patterns. This is called the Riemann hypothesis. Well, the Riemann hypothesis is not just a vague hypothesis. The Riemann hypothesis predicts exactly where prime numbers occur by applying these harmonic patterns, wave functions, to a basic prediction of how many prime numbers there will be. So wave functions get involved in all kinds of things, even the existence of prime numbers. And the idea that there could be wave functions or modulus functions of the Fibonacci sequence is not that far-fetched when we see how modulus functions or wave functions get involved in other phenomena. And we're hypothesizing that the fundamental process of spin at all levels, it's like a fractal levels of spin, from the subatomic level to this rotation of an object like the Earth, to revolutionary periods of objects around a star, that this becomes attuned to Pisano periods. Now, this is very speculative, and I'm introducing it in order to explain observations. This is what we do in science. We come up with models to explain observations. If we have the observation that astrology works, which is not scientifically completely verified yet, but if we just accept that as a possibility, I'm introducing an expansion, development, new ideas within the context of physics that explain why the zodiac exists. And combined with dimension reduction, the Pisano periods create the zodiac and the various qualities of spin. Very speculative from the point of view of current scientific knowledge, but not that unreasonable. Now, so we're concluding that the proposed basis of the zodiac is Pisano periods. Pisano periods explain why a zodiac exists. This theory is consistent with scientific models, but introduces new ideas which have not yet been discovered. This theory integrates many different ideas into a coherent model, which is very desirable, of course. It is especially desirable as empirical evidence for astrology grows. And I'll show you some links to the research we've done. A lot of people are not aware that there's a growing body of research that actually shows astrology works. If this research gets to the point of validating astrology, then we're really going to need a model, and we've already got the model underway to help explain why astrology works. Also, there are not other reasonable explanations for why a zodiac would exist. The idea that it's based on seasons, as I mentioned, I have a whole video that explains why that's a very weak argument. Now, why these ideas are not as speculative as they seem. Let me go over, because it seems like a wild idea that we're going to say that there are Pisano periods being closely, intimately related to spin and creating these structures of space. But here's some ideas for why this is not as speculative as it might seem. Number one, there is a growing evidence of measurable effects in astrology, as I said, and I'll provide a link to some of these videos in a few slides. I'm almost done here. We've created models for what creates a great athlete, what creates a rock musician, when gold prices are high, determines when people are extroverted. These are controlled studies, not just anecdotal evidence. They're not hypothesis tests. They've not been replicated. The research is ongoing, but we're moving way beyond anecdotal evidence to find actual measurable effects in astrology. This is something that even some astrologers don't think is possible. This is a radical, revolutionary approach to astrology. Also, other reasons why what I'm proposing is not as far-fetched as it may originally seem, not as speculative as it may seem, is that all of these ideas are based on concepts of vibration and frequency. We've developed a new language of astrology called vibrational astrology, and in vibrational astrology, we have a very simple idea to quote from Nikola Tesla: if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. By the way, I still haven't been able to find a clear source for this, but we'll assume that the quote is true. And that's what we've done in vibrational astrology, is we found that the secrets of astrology are in terms of frequency and vibration. And vibrational astrology has more support from research than any other form of astrology. And again, we have dozens of tutorial videos explaining the results of a lot of that research. Another reason why the ideas I'm presenting here are not as speculative as they may seem is because Bell's theorem states that reality is non-local. Physicists like Nassim Haramein have models that indicate that the entire universe is in communication with all other parts. So reality is non-local. There's communication going on. Professor Jana Levin, a cosmologist at Columbia University, points out that the collisions at the Hadron Collider create very rapidly decaying small black holes, and that black holes are singularities that cannot be described in terms of matter. She states that the original Big Bang happened in space, which is everywhere and not at a point. So Levin, Jana Levin, leading cosmologist, professor, emphasizes that a black hole is created by matter imploding on itself, but it becomes something without matter. It's hard for the human mind to grasp. These are singularities, and that the Big Bang, which started our universe, we tend to think of it as some point in space, but it simultaneously, in a sense, happened everywhere. So when I hear these ideas from people like Professor Levin, these descriptions indicate what I would think of as a mystical origin of the universe and a mystical basis of the universe. So the idea that there is communication going on and these kinds of extraordinary connections, is not so unbelievable. Also, very often mathematical concepts are found to have practical applications later. And also the intricacy and elegancy, the symmetries and beauty of the Pisano periods distributed around a circle are deeply intriguing and suggest angular momentum without actually spinning. This is mind-boggling to me. The physicists say that this fundamental property, this property of the fundamental particles, that there is spin, which has angular momentum but nothing's moving. When you look at these Pisano periods, you get the feeling of spin without the numbers moving. So just very close similarities in the way of thinking. And from the point of view of astrologers like Dane Rudhyar emphasize that the zodiac is a 12-phase cycle. He referred to the zodiac as a cosmic mandala. This is literally true if the zodiac is based on Pisano periods. It is a cosmic mandala built out of the structure of space with 12 phases. So very often there are surprising connections of fundamental ideas. For example, as I mentioned before, there are wave patterns and prime numbers as identified by the Riemann hypothesis. Vibration is fundamental, prime numbers are fundamental, and amazingly, vibration, which is fundamental, and prime numbers, which are fundamental, are interconnected. An excellent book on this subject, by the way, is The Music of the Primes by Marcus Sautois. Highly recommend it if you're interested in exploring this some more. But my point being that we'll find vibration intricately connected with many things, and that there are vibrations, or at least in the sense of modulus functions, within the Fibonacci sequence is no crazier or wilder than the idea that there are harmonic patterns to prime numbers. So we see vibration, modulus functions working their way into many things in physics. Also, the nature of gravity waves, dark matter, and dark energy is hardly understood at present. The language of science is mathematics. So in the vast amount of undiscovered information about these new areas of investigation like gravity waves, dark matter, and dark energy, it is not impossible that concepts like Pisano periods can become very important. So there's a huge amount not known. To refer to Professor Jana Levin again, she says this is an exciting time to be a physicist where there's so much to discover, so much that's unknown, and so much being discovered. Gravity waves were just clearly discovered and identified in early 2016, just a little bit before I'm making this video. And it's the same is true with astrology. All of this anecdotal evidence and mythological thinking, we are now in the process of getting measurable results, consistent results, models that fit the data. Very exciting. And we're seeing how it's intricately related and similar to ideas in physics. So there is this revolution in astrology where we're getting ideas that are supported by research, that not just anecdotal evidence, that's based on a relatively simple theoretical framework of vibrations. And this revolution currently is happening primarily among educated people who are not in the mainstream of astrology. I think very slowly this radical new approach to astrology is starting to affect the astrological organizations and some of the popular astrology, but mostly this is a movement among educated people within the sciences and the social sciences who find this to be very exciting. I think the inner core of astrology responding a little more slowly makes sense because they're already ingrained in other ways of thinking about astrology. So we're putting all the pieces of this puzzle together with research methods, the software, and we're even understanding some of the theoretical underpinnings of how all this works. Okay, so here are the links to the other videos that I mentioned I would have. There are many more videos in addition to these, but this video on sacred geometry, that the zodiac is not based on seasons, but is based on sacred geometry. If you want to learn some more about that, there's this video. Here's a video on the Pisano period modulus 10, which is really incredibly mind-boggling. The number of relationships to the zodiac is incredible. Here's an entire course on Fibonacci numbers, prime numbers, etc., as related to astrology, and includes links to several videos on the work of Russell Olhausen and other videos. Here's a course on research, which includes links to some of the research projects we've done. Here's the model we've developed for rock and roll musicians, what's in the chart of rock and roll musicians, and lastly, the model that we're developing that determines athletic ability. We're in the process now of some really exciting research that goes beyond any other research we've done before. It'll take another year or so for us to complete this research. So very exciting that we're developing ideas in astrology supported by controlled research, not just anecdotal evidence. Eventually should lead to a hypothesis test where we'll reach the gold standard of identifying very clearly measurable effects from astrology. This research takes a lot of work and a lot of time. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but we're making slow and steady progress, and I think almost any scientist will tell you exactly the same thing happens in any kind of research. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of dedication. All of that is happening and moving forward very nicely. And here are some links to our software page, Cosmic Pattern Software, which makes the serious software, which enables us to do all this research. Here's the YouTube page for the rest of the videos, and some other astrology websites that I'm involved in. Okay, my friends, I am at 53 minutes. This is a long video, but I think an important one. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.